Sir Desmond Stirling in Dread Rocks Holiday, Part 1. I don't think I'm taking social distancing too seriously, but I have rented a lighthouse off the coast of Cornwall. I've just packed the basic essentials for the duration: my typewriter, a jar of caviar, a crate of whiskey, and the collected recordings of Elaine Page on music cassette. I think I'll be very happy in Dread Rocks Lighthouse, just off the coast of the beguiling Cornish town of Poltax riots. Apparently, there are some charming legends about the place which will be interesting to research. Well, when I say charming, they mostly involve murder, insanity, and mutilation. I was rowed to the lighthouse by old Jethro, an ageless cove with a face like a varnished walnut. I say rowed. For health reasons I insisted he keep 10 feet away from me at all times, so he was outside the boat, pushing it all the way here. Old Jethro mentioned the legends to me too. Frankly, to be specific, he muttered dark warnings about how all visitors to the lighthouse were doomed, either to die or to go seriously potty. I rubbed my hands with glee. Hand sanitizer. I briefly explored some of the lighthouse when I first arrived. Decommissioned many years earlier, it was sparsely furnished and equipped, but my wartime SAS training had prepared me for such hardship. There was a bedroom, round, with a single hammock hanging from the ceiling. A small living room, round, in which there was an armchair, a radio transmitter receiver, and a pile of books. I eagerly scanned the titles, and was delighted to find a musty old tome all about the history of the lighthouse. It was written in 1953 by a former keeper, a one Hubert Polkinghorne. On the ground floor I also found fishing equipment, several tins of pilchards, used by date February 1968, an Aldis lamp, plus several barrels of oil to power the light. I also explored the galley, that's the kitchen for the benefit of you landlubbers, and discovered that it was sufficiently stocked. A kettle, a couple of pans, a microwave, a Moulinex food processor, a Le Creuset wok non-stick, a bamboo sushi mat, a fondue set, and some Tupperware. I had brought basic provisions, but had left instructions for groceries to be rowed over every few days, at least until this wretched plague had run its course. That first night, I was lulled to sleep by the crushing of the waves against the rocks, currents which had, in past years, smashed so many bodies to wet pulp. It was rather soothing. My billet was very comfortable, and in my dreams I reminisced about long-ago carnal adventures I'd enjoyed in hammocks, when I was suddenly awoken by an unearthly sound. It was a woman singing, her shrill voice penetrating the sound of the busy ocean. I sat up and listened carefully. Was this the legendary siren? The fabled creature, half woman, half bird, who was reputed to lure sailors to a terrible fate with the bewitching nature of her song? Oh, even my enemies know me as a man of supreme self-control and iron will, but I could feel myself succumbing to the lure of that eerie yet beauteous canticle. I knew that unless I exerted the utmost self-discipline, I would willingly end my days, dashed to pieces on the rocks outside, lured by a supernatural soprano. But just as I could sense that I was in peril of climbing the stairs in a state of mesmerism and flinging myself off the lantern gallery, I realized that I'd left the cassette player on, and I could hear La Page belting out "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." The next morning, I decided to try out the fishing equipment I'd found yesterday. I hadn't indulged in such a pastime for many a month, and yet it all brought back happy memories, including the time that I'd used a fishing line to garrote a Nazi who'd parachuted into the Somerset village of Godfrey Quigley dressed as a nun. Can't recall exactly when that was, but the war had been over at least 10 years. At first, I thought I'd lost the knack of trying to capture a wild creature without the use of an elephant gun, but I soon felt a huge jerk, and when I reeled it in, I'd bagged a porpoise. That's my supper sorted out. Now, are they better fried or grilled? Livestock caught and gutted, I sautéed the porpoise, and over supper I started to flick through Hubert Polkinghorne's book about the history of Dread Rocks Lighthouse. As the working class would say, lummy. This place has certainly seen its fair share of calamities. One would almost say it was jinxed, if one were the sort of cove to believe in jinxes. It would seem there wasn't a single lighthouse keeper who didn't come to a sticky end. Several went potty, and either topped themselves or their fellow keeper. At least half a dozen just vanished. One swam the whole way back to the mainland, claiming that he had regularly been visited by aliens and anally probed, and after about the 12th time decided he'd had enough. Another believed he was the new Messiah and started his own religion, but as the only other person in the vicinity was his fellow keeper, who was a staunch Methodist and wasn't going to worship his colleague, thank you very much, he was accused of heresy and burnt to death using the lantern. And several keepers claimed that the local sea was chock-a-block with strange lizard creatures who stood upright like men and wore string vests. I wondered what had become of Hubert Polkinghorne. He had been a keeper himself, but had obviously survived death and madness long enough to write the book. But had he ultimately succumbed to either, like all his colleagues? If I weren't a strictly rational fellow, I might be getting very concerned about the potential welfare of the old Stirling noddle. As it is, I can foresee getting several bestsellers out of my enforced quarantine on Dread Rocks Lighthouse. I repaired to bed about midnight, brain buzzing with ideas for books, gut whirring with the dyspepsia of porpoise. The rain had got heavier throughout the evening, and now a fully-fledged storm seemed about to commence. I even fantasized about lighting the lantern, giving the lighthouse back its original function. I abluted, emptied the bladder, out of the porthole, as I couldn't be bothered to descend that spiral staircase yet again to the Kazi, and clambered into my hammock. I must have read a while, the latest one by Marilyn French or something in that style, but my eyelids soon drooped, and before I knew it, I'd popped off to Bedfordshire. I haven't the foggiest how long I'd been asleep, when I was awoken with a start. There was a loud hammering noise. I assumed it was in my head, partly due to the whiskey I'd knocked back that evening, allied with the gastric turmoil caused by flipper a la mode. I sat up, shook my head, blinked the crust out of my eyes. No, that noise was definitely outside of my cranium. Thunder, I wondered? There was quite a storm raging outside. I waited patiently, and within moments the noise reappeared. A regular but frantic pounding. It sounded like a door knocker, but that seemed unlikely, seeing as how I was currently half a mile into the Atlantic and surrounded by a raging tempest. I made my way down the spiral staircase, my bare feet flinching from the cold of the stone. It was most definitely the door. But who, or more importantly, what, could be banging at the front door of a lighthouse at this time of night? I suppressed my fertile, but thankfully lucrative imagination, and continued down the stairs. It was most likely to be a passing boat, seeking sanctuary from the storm, possibly after being wrecked on the rocks. But just in case it was a more hostile visitor, I had grabbed the nearest heavy object, in this case the Le Creuset walk from the galley as I passed downwards, and readied myself for combat. I reached the front door. It was a sturdy beast, secured with 2 keys and 3 magnificent bolts. I unsheathed the bolts as quietly as possible, then gingerly turned the first key. I girded my substantial loins, took a deep breath, and twisted the second key. The door was now unlocked. There was nothing between yours truly and whatever was outside. But old Stirling is made of stern stuff. I've faced Jerry, Satanists, communists, and angry textiles on Studland Beach. I raised the wok above my head, grabbed the door handle, and flung open the lighthouse door. Before me stood a drenched figure, his eyes lit with a frenzy of madness, foamy water cascading from his every orifice. Old Jethro. To be continued. Sir Desmond Stirling in Dread Rocks Holiday was written and performed by Anthony Keetch.